What's going on, everyone? Welcome to a spoiler discussion. Ending explains for Smile, the newest film from director Parker Finn. Okay, as I always say, just to kind of, a little bit of warning before we begin, I am going to do a little bit of a non-spoiler discussion of this film, then I'm going to go straight into spoilers, just give my honest, my personal opinion and stuff like that, and then I'll talk about this film in general, kind of its concepts and ideas and so on and so forth. So if you don't want to watch the whole video because you don't want to be spoiled, just watch the first part. It is non-spoilers, and then we'll go into spoiler details. So in this movie, Smile, which is like the 60th horror film to come out this year in 2022, which has actually been quite a good year for horror films, basically sees a character played by Sosie Bacon, or Susie Bacon, who is a clinical psychologist or therapist, who in the process comes across this very, what I would call psychosis patient who's losing her sanity. She basically sees that she is seeing people that are smiling everywhere. And because of what's going on, she saw her professor kill herself and stuff like that. She is seeing and freaking out about this thing that, of course, Sosie Bacon can't see. And she ends up killing herself. It's in the trailer, so we know this is happening. And in the process, Sosie or Susie Bacon is starting to be affected by this because, as if you've ever seen It Follows, it seems to be like a pathogen or an idea that starts to spread. Well, as we can see in this movie, if you've seen the trailer, she starts to try to uncover this whole thing and what it is. She starts to see things. She starts to be haunted by things. And she has only a limited amount of time to save herself from, the same fate as everyone else. So this movie, Smile, is a movie that I watched the trailer for. There was a trailer released in I don't want to say May or June or something like that. It was like 30 seconds long. It looked really stupid. The actual full-length trailer came out like a month later. It looked like a very paint-by-numbers movie, to be fairly honest, and I was not expecting very much out of this. Sometimes horror films can be very deceiving in their trailer marketing to kind of hide the secrets. And so Parker Finn, who directed this film, I looked on his IMDb and it really didn't have anything. So I didn't really expect this much out of this. I expected it to be something from a director who just needed a project to make some money. And on top of that, it doesn't really have anybody famous in it like a lot of horror films do. I think the most famous person in this movie is Penn, and Jessie Usher's in this movie. So I really didn't expect much from it at all. And like I said, the marketing is pretty terrible. But then it started premiering at a couple of film festivals, I think like Fantastic Fest or something like that. It premiered at, and surprisingly enough, it got really good reviews. It got reviews to the point where they say this is like one of the best horror films of the year. So that's really shocking, especially from what you see from the marketing, because there has been a lot of good horror films come out this year. A lot of crazy, strange, between comedy horror and like family horror and stuff like that. It's been a pretty decent year for horror, probably one of the best in several years. So what I said? I said, okay, I'll go see this. If it's getting such great reviews, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is a surprise. Have been horror films that have had terrible marketing that have been great. So with that said, it's not a bad horror film. It's not a great horror film. It's very paint by numbers, but it's a very effective horror film. It has great scares. It has great violent moments. It's a movie with a very interesting and scary premise. And it's a movie that, the performances as very standard to horror films actually have some weight and levity to it because of the nature of what it's being presented. There's stuff in Sosie Bacon's past that comes into full effect in this movie, and kind of how the people view her as she starts kind of losing her sanity when the whole kind of idea of Smile happens. It's a movie that I was really taken aback by about how much I was enjoying it. There have been a couple of negative reviews, which, comes along with territory of horror films, but this is a really pretty decent horror film. It really is. It's a surprise. It's one of those films that you'll see people talk about for, as one of those like cult classics, or one of those films that, does pretty well in the theaters, because it just is a good time for, the time it's on screen. It is a little long at an hour and 50 minutes. It could have been like an hour and 30 minutes, but I think overall, I just think I was surprised by what I was watching. I wasn't expecting to have this much, fun watching the movie. It just was shocking, the fact that it's a movie that feels like a Truth or Dare or something like that, or, Slender Man, where it just feels like it's going to be an absolute disaster of a movie. But this actually turns out very similar to something like The Empty Man, where you just don't see it coming, you're really shocked by what you're watching, and not on the visceral, like violent level, but just the fact that it's a competently told story with some great horror elements. And like I said, it is very traditional by the book, but I was I couldn't believe it. I was actually surprised that it was a pretty decent movie, and I think it will do pretty well. I don't know if it'll do $100 million for Paramount, but I think it will have a pretty lasting stay throughout the holiday season and throughout the Halloween season with this just kind of interesting premise, to be fairly honest. Like I said, I think Sosie Bacon does a pretty decent, competent job. She's having to do a lot of weightlifting when it comes to, the ideas and concepts she's being presented, and there are some cool tricks and trades and kind of twists and turns that happen that really kind of benefit her as an actress kind of coming up into this world. And like I said, Cal Penn's on it. He's in it for a little bit, and Jessie T. Usher's in it for a little bit as her like boyfriend slash fiance, and some other characters. She has an ex-boyfriend who, of course, is a police officer and stuff like that, who helps her out. And like I said, it leads to a conclusion that I found kind of interesting, and like I said, I'll talk about it in the spoiler discussion, but I found it really an intriguing idea. So, in the end, that's kind of where I'm going to leave it on my non-spoiler take. Like I said, it's definitely worth watching if you're interested in horror films. It is a little predictable. It is a little by the books and paint by numbers when it comes to the horror genre. But I think it is definitely something that is a little surprising, not what I was expecting. So, definitely check it out if you're into horror, or if you're into visceral horror in a lot of respects. And I think you will be surprised how much you enjoy it. It's just like I said, it's a little long, but I think you'll enjoy it. So. And so with that said, that is my non-spoiler take on Smile. Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead into spoilers now, so be aware. Just we're going to talk about the full length of the movie. And so with this movie Smile, in the spoiler discussion sense, it's surprising how entertaining it was. It's a movie about mental illness. It has been talked about in non-spoiler sense, but it's a movie about a woman played by Sosie Bacon who has a past with her mother, who committed suicide because of depression, and she overdosed and stuff like that. And it's haunted her ever since she was little. So the idea of this thing, this creature that smiles, that feeds upon like the fears and the horror nature of everyone around her, is really fascinating, to be fairly honest. It wasn't what I was expecting. I didn't go in expecting this to be about mental illness or anything like that, which is really kind of what caught me off guard, because this movie starts out, she's a clinical psychologist, which is really interesting. You don't see a lot of that in movies when it comes to horror elements. She's trying to take care of a patient who just he's an individual who is he's not dangerous, but he constantly is like referring the same like speech over and over and over. He is an individual that she's trying to help, but has relapses. Think of some of the characters in like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and stuff like that. And one day, like I said in my non-spoiler review, a young woman comes in and she's freaking out. She's like screaming. She is an individual that apparently was very normal a week beforehand, until she saw her professor kill himself with a hammer, and he was smiling like this, really dangerous. And she thought how scary the smile was. Basically, this movie feels a little bit like The Ring in a lot of respects, or it feels like, a traditional J-horror film in the aspects where the characters and ideas represented are very based on a very traditional, very mental look into a world that is, if you think about how the mentality of your brain and how it affects things that you could see and not see, and how you kind of like distort things, and how things just kind of affect you in certain ways from PTSD and stuff like that. Like we said, as you see in the trailer, this young girl sees and freaks out about something that, of course, Sosie Bacon's character can't see, and she actually kills herself with the knife, which she ends up forming into a smile, as we can see in the gurney when they put the sheet over her. We see like a smile face, and that's when it starts to infect, of course, Sosie Bacon's character, who starts to see, as the young woman has specified, you'll see the smile character in the faces of people that maybe you don't know. They just kind of come out of nowhere. And like The Ring, things start to amp up as this movie moves along, as this character of Sosie Bacon's playing starts to kind of affect it, it starts to affect her visually and mentally, and she starts to kind of lose sanity in all respects. What's really interesting is it really kind of, people start questioning whether she's still constantly being affected by what happened to her mother back in, when she was younger and what she saw. But it affects her relationship with her sister. They're trying to sell a house that was their family's house. There is moments in this movie where like they have their confrontations. It just completely starts to go on like uncontrolled and stuff like that. And it leads to her just like having like a strained relationship with her fiance, who's played by Jessie T. Usher. And once again, like I said, she sees like the man she's treating at the hospital. She sees him smiling. He says some stuff. She, has him restrained and put under, even though it was like her mind playing tricks on her and stuff like that with the smile character. And in the process, she, like, for instance, she goes to her sister's son's birthday party, which is 7 years old. She has a cat named Mustache, which she's been looking for. At some point, something manipulated her, and she, of course, she killed the cat at some point, and she doesn't know how she did it. She put it in this box that was going to be given a train set or whatever it was, and that of course causes even more problems in the situation. And Susie Bacon's character loses more and more sanity. She starts losing time. She starts she starts having like whatever they call a really cool effect where like she'll be sitting at like her house, and her alarm for the house, a house alarm, will go off, and stuff will start happening. She like answers the call. It's that creature, the smile character or whatever, and then all of a sudden it'll flip back, and she realizes she's like it's just kind of like a dream sequence, or it's just kind of like a alternate reality sequence. A lot of that stuff happens where she'll be doing something and she'll imagine something, but she'll be back to where she was earlier, and it's just. I love that idea where you can take a character's perception of reality and kind of twist it and turn it with like, these different kind of ideas where if you ever played Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem or something like that, it was a video game on GameCube. The idea of that game was this person who basically has this book, is reading these stories, and as each story plays out, the sanity of the character starts kind of flipping upon itself, so things will start happening in the game that are crazy, like the volume of your TV will go down, or you'll start going through the walls and stuff like that. And that's what's happening here, where more and more of the infection that happens, the more and more of the losing of sanity that Susie Bacon's character goes through, the more and more reality starts to distort, and you start to see that, which is really cool. Like I said, with this, like, she'll be like here, she'll be heading towards a specific thing, she'll be haunted by the smile character in some form or fashion, where there's this really cool scene with her sister, where her sister walks out of the car, and her, like, the head of the sister falls down like it's put on by like rubber or something like that. It's a really cool effect, which I thought was really neat. And you'll realize that like she's like really back in the house again, or she's really somewhere else, and like there'll be time jumps where there'll be like a jump scare, but it'll be from like her going in her house, and all of a sudden like a car almost hitting her, and it's like a really cool effect that makes you like not really sure what's going on, what's real, what's not. And I really like that about that, and that's kind of how her character plays out this entire movie, because the more and more you get towards the end, the more and more you realize that this character is an embodiment of just like if you're seeing It Follows, it's a character that kind of spreads from person to person to person to be able to live, and she has to convince like her ex-boyfriend, who's a cop, to make sure that she's safe, and like to investigate this. And they uncover like it went from the young student to the professor, then the professor to another woman who he witnessed at a conference, and the woman witnessed a guy, stab himself in the chest with guarding shears and stuff like that. And I really just found that fascinating. It's a really cool concept, and like I said, when they're able to execute it well, it's not cheaply done. I think that's fun and entertaining, and that's what this movie does in spades. It's not perfect because it definitely has horror tropes, and I think Sosie Bacon's character goes down some paths that are kind of stupid. And I think Cal Penn's kind of terrible in this movie, to be fairly honest. He's only in it for a few minutes, but he just kind of feels like a stumbling block. And the sister, I understand where she comes from. It's another trope. And Jessie T. Usher he's kind of a throwaway character in this movie. But I like that. And I also, the one thing I didn't mention in my non-spoiler review is I love the sound work in this movie. I love the music in this movie, because weird, and it feels like there is there's dialogue and ideas being presented, and the way the music plays out is very similar to Sinister, where it almost feels like if you play it backwards, you're going to get some really creepy messaging, especially during the credit sequence when the credits start playing in this movie. You sit there and listen to it, and it really feels like they've reversed all the dialogue. Like there's some incanto or something like that, where there's some like wording or dialogue that's being presented that if you played it backwards, you kind of understand it'd be a little creepy. And that's what this movie does when it comes to the music and it comes to the atmosphere, where there's something always unsettling about the world, and the ideas being presented. There's some really cool visual effects work, where there was something in Dr. Sleep where they did some really cool effects with like the Rebecca Ferguson character, where she's flying through the air and stuff like that. And there's some really cool shots in here where the camera will be tilted upside down and will slowly pan forward, like you're always like constantly in a state of disrepair and a state of disarray and stuff like that, where it always feels like you're never fully on board. You're always fully tilted in a different direction, like you're under, going upside down. And there's like, shots where they're like, above, where you're constantly looking down, like you're the creature or something like that. There's like really cool shots from the top, which I really feel like are very effective horror elements when it comes to like, photography and stuff like that. When you could do a shot of the city upside down and you have it slowly spin with some really creepy music, that's a really effective shot. I could watch that a billion times in a movie and it really feels effective and it works and stuff like that. Like I said, that's what makes this movie work in a lot of aspects. I wish the character development was a little bit more punchy when it comes to that type of stuff. That's why It Follows and Cabin in the Woods and all these films, have come out, Trick or Treat, or so effective, even though they're very traditional movies when it comes to horror films, is they have a way to twist and turn the idea and ideology. And I don't think The Smile does that very well in this movie, but it leads to the ending, which is always going to be one of two ways. It's always going to go in the way of The Ring or something like that, where she makes a videotape and spreads it on, or it's going to go where they're able to destroy evil. But I think horror films, when they do, and they do the kind of they do the turn, or they do kind of you think it's going to go this way, but it actually is going to go this way. I think it's fascinating because she gets to a point where we finally see the Smile character, and it's really cool. I won't explain it. I'll tell you in a second, but it's really cool. It's affecting her. It looks like her mother and stuff like that. And you think that she wins and destroys the creature. She burns down the house. She's all good. Well, it does a thing where it turns it on its head, where in fact she never left the house. She's still at the house, and she went to the house to escape from everyone so that she could kill the monster and stop the spread of the disease. Think about like Fall or something like that, with the Denzel Washington movie. And in the process of everything, no, she never left the house. She was in a state of like, trans, whatever you want to call it. And basically we see the ex-boyfriend, the cop, appear. He's trying to help her. And then we see the creature again, this really tall, lanky creature, something like Doug Jones would do or something like that. And basically it rips off all its skin, which is amazing. It's an awesome visual effect. And it actually opens up her mouth and actually inserts himself into her mouth, like the whole body, which is the final infection of the character, the final, like I said, the idea of like mental illness and stuff like that. She has finally lost her sanity, and when he walks in, she's basically like turned her back around, kind of like Blair Witch Project, and she douses herself in lighter fluid or kerosene fluid or whatever you want to call it. Turns around, has the big smile on her face, and lights herself on fire. And I love that. I love that idea. It's a very it's not what you would expect. I mean, you kind of expect it, but you wouldn't expect it, because it's similar to like Drag Me to Hell, or like I said, Fall, or The Ring. You think it's going to go one way, and then it kind of completely turns itself upon each other, and it doesn't allow for the cheap ending, the good ending, or whatever you can say. It just basically says that this disease, like It Follows, is never going to end. There's always going to be a problem with the mental illness. There's always going to be a problem with the state of society, and the fact that we will always try to combat it, but it will never go away, because it's just the unfortunate nature of Hereditary and all that stuff, when it just completely continues. And that's what happens here. Like, there was never a way to stop it. It's just going to continue. Unfortunately, every time it infects someone, the next person that is around them is the one that gets infected. And of course, the cop, the ex-boyfriend, is going to be infected by it. But it really becomes an affecting moment, because once again, it's really dealing with some really difficult subject matter, and it's fairly honest. But that's what makes horror films so great. When they are effective, they actually take the tropes and ideas of real life personal situations and kind of use it to its advantage. So that's why horror films are not only in abundance, but they're cheap, and they're able to be produced, and able to bring out some really interesting broaching topics. So, but like I said, that's where it ends. She ends up, killing herself. She ends up burning herself alive, and you can see it in the eyes of the ex-boyfriend cop, and you can see just her like smiling as she's on the lid on fire and stuff like that. And it's a really entertaining horror film, to be fairly honest. It's up there with like Bodies, or any of these horror films that have come out this year, where you just can't believe that it's actually as good as it is, to be fairly honest. And I was really surprised. Like I said, Bodies deals with the whole idea of like influencers and stuff like that. This deals with mental illness. And you should definitely check it out if you like horror films, especially ones, like I said, like Cabin in the Woods, or Drag Me to Hell and stuff like that, where you think they've won, but you realize that they're never going to win. The creature's always going to be there. It's always going to find a way to infect itself into your body. And like The Empty Man, this is going to be a film that I don't know if it's going to do very well, but it is going to be definitely a cult film in his later career. So with that said, I do hope there is no more sequels, but there probably will be, because this looks like a sequel franchise. But for the time being, it's a pretty good start for a first film in a really really decent horror film. So anyways, with that said, that is my spoiler discussion ending explains for Smile, one that I didn't expect to like, but actually enjoyed quite much. But with that said, thank you so much for watching. In the comments below, as I always say, what did you think of Smile? What did you think of the overall premise? This is a spoiler discussion, so, have at it, but let me know what you think. Otherwise, if you like what you see on this channel, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell top to find what's coming next. If you like the video, awesome. Hit that like button, and as always, we'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.